our club here.
Oh, okay. At Farmers.
Great, thank you.
Right, okay.
One, two,
You have to give the name one.
Yeah, yeah, so, but yeah, if you want, but anyway, fine. I'm really pleased to present this third edition of what's called Great Moments in PLP History, which was a project started when I was in a group called the National Alliance, along with Sean McQueenie and Brenville Hanna and Michael Simonet back in 1977. We were a group of then 20-somethings who were dedicated to supporting the PLP. The essays on the history of the struggle derived from a book which Dr. Doris Johnson wrote called The Quiet Revolution, which is now out of print. And they were actually written as a form of short pieces delivered at the PLP's convention in 1977, which was held at the Polaris Hall of the Holiday Inn. I had been asked later by some young PLPs when I was visiting a meeting in Grand Bahama to write a piece about the procedures of running PLP branches. So in 1998, when I printed it again, we added in the second edition the manual of procedure for PLP branches. And if you look at that, you can actually follow that as a template for how to run a branch, including what announcements you need to make, how you do the announcements, and the latest edition even includes the references to the internet. With this latest edition, I've added three new essays and a poem which is called With These Hands. Now, one is an essay called Pinling and Me, which was written in 2000 and delivered at the College of the Bahamas in September 2000, shortly after Sir Lyndon died. And you know Sir Lyndon died on the 26th of August, 2000. And I decided at that time that I would put down all of the things I remembered about my relationship with him, working with him, both personal and public, and I tried to record them in this essay, which was written in September 2000. I've also added the essay delivered when I was foreign minister for the Pinling lecture, which was called What It Means to be Bahamian. And in that essay, some of you will find the recollection of the story of how Carlton Francis, in January of 1972, was stopped when he was going through customs in Miami. He was a minister of the government, and he was stopped by US Customs and physically searched, held down in a room and physically searched before he was released because they said they thought he was carrying contraband at the time. And how helpless Bahamians felt when that report came back to Nassau, because the British who represented us at that time did nothing to help and in fact facilitated the search of the minister. And the reason I recollect the incident so clearly is because I worked then at the Bahamas Information Services, or as it was then called, Government Information Services, under Cyril Stevenson. And we were, this occurred in the evening, and when the minister returned from the visit abroad, he shut down the customs facilities at the airport and would not allow any Americans to be processed through the airport. And I remember the then Consul General of the United States frantically searching for Sir Lyndon, the Prime Minister, who was at dinner over at Paradise Island at the time, to try and get the airport reopened so that people could be processed through the airport. And that was in those days, that's how the PLP exercised power. I mean, you don't see that kind of exercise of power anymore. And Leslie Miller often talks about Carlton Francis and how he called in the manager of the Royal Bank of Canada, or one of the banks, called in one of the managers because there was a problem with Bahamianization. And when the manager, I think he was granting, I think Leslie says the story was he was granting, the Royal Bank was going to get 4 work permits. And when the manager began to resist, he says, you now have 3. And every time he resisted, the number began to dwindle. We don't exercise the power in that way anymore. But the PLP was really quite a powerful party. As with regard to the poem, With These Hands, there's a woman named Melissa Sayers who is a vice chairman of the party. And she was speaking at the PLP's convention in February of 2008. And I heard her repeating these words, which came from a speech that Sir Lyndon wrote. And I thought to myself, where did I hear those words before? Those words sound familiar. So I went and checked, and of course, it was a speech that I had written for Sir Lyndon. And in the speech, I had quoted my own poem. So I went back, found the poem, and I've reprinted the whole poem in the book. Now, I would not pretend to be a poet. I don't think it's a very good poem, but since she quoted it, I have it there. In addition, in the book, I published tributes that I wrote at the funerals of the late Cyril Stevenson, who is a friend and mentor and used to be the director of the Bahamas Information Services, and the late Jeffrey Thompson, who is the uncle of Fane Thompson, who is here tonight. Jeffrey Thompson was one of the original cabinet in 1967, following majority rule. And of course, Cyril Stevenson is credited by H.M. Taylor, the first party chairman, as being one of the original founders of the PLP, and in fact, the man who came up with the idea of a progressive liberal party and did all of the footwork to establish the party, which was in fact established on the 23rd of November, 1953. So the party will be 56 years of age this November. Those essays give an insight into the early formation and practices of the PLP in opposition and in the government. Mr. Thompson, Jeffrey Thompson, was part of the group of newcomers to the PLP. They were then 20-something, 30-somethings, and they ousted Cyril Stevenson's generation from power in the PLP. He was part of a group called the National Committee for Positive Action, the NCPA. And I keep saying to today's 20-somethings and 30-somethings that the phrase of Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand, is one they need to embrace. Because every time they ask me, when is the PLP going to have a role for young people, I find that a very odd and strange question, and one which I never considered, because from I walked out of high school, my view was that I was PLP, I wanted to be a politician, and you simply seize the day. And so I say to them, power concedes nothing without a demand. The vision and the example of Sir Lyndon and his generation were, these were men who came into a party. They were 20-something, 30-something. Sir Lyndon was 26 when he was elected to Parliament in 1956, and they seized the day. 11 years later, he was Premier of the country at the age of 36.